Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining our webinar today titled Patient Technology, Tools for Industry. And we'll talk about designing clinical trials with patients and vendor input. Next slide, please. For all of you, my name is Anthony Bronio. I am a Transcelerate employee. I'm a program manager who oversees our patient-focused initiatives. And on the line with me today, we have Amber Williams, who provides project management support for our patient technology initiative. Our expert presenters, first and foremost, Pete Schaefer. Pete will do an intro of himself later on in the presentation, as well as Melissa Dupont, who will be presenting on our tools as well. Please note that all lines have been muted to ensure a pleasant listening experience for all attendees. You may reduce the GoToWebinar control panel by clicking on the orange and white arrow in the upper right corner. We welcome any questions that you may have throughout the discussion. Those can simply be submitted using the questions function you should see in your control panel. Just don't forget to hit the send button after you type in your question. Also noted, this webinar may be recorded in whole or in part, and if you do not consent to be recorded, please send a note using the questions panel. We'll be using the GoToWebinar polling function during today's webinar. Your participation in this polling is voluntary and all responses are anonymous, and aggregated answers are shown as a percentage of all respondents. To test out the system, to ensure that the audio is working properly, we're going to launch our test question now. So if you could just go ahead and please respond to the test question. Okay, it looks like the feature is working properly. Thank you all for taking the time to vote. Next slide, please. We're just going to go over some simple ground rules here. We want to make this discussion helpful and answer any questions that we can. So again, a reminder that participation is voluntary, as is using any of Transcelerate's assets or tools. The responsibility for compliance with laws and regulations is owned by the solution adopters. You do not have to identify what company you work for as part of this presentation. And then just some items that we would ask you not to discuss through the questioning is anything specific to vendors, sites, CROs that you are using or not using, any issues you have with any vendors, sites, or CROs, any of your organization's long-term development plans, and anything as it relates to finances and costs. And then some items that we can't answer questions about. We can't answer questions about vendors, any of the cost of implementing any of Transcelerate's tools or assets, and which member companies are using specific tools or assets. Again, just an overview of our agenda. We're going to do a brief introduction, an overview of Transcelerate, and an overview of our patient technology initiative. We'll discuss our vendor and sponsor engagement consideration tools, as well as our patient considerations. In addition to that, we'll talk about our patient technology site feedback questionnaire. We're going to take a deeper dive into that questionnaire for sites. And then we'll end it with 15 minutes for closing and then some Q&A. Okay, so our next slide, I think we do have another poll question here. Please indicate which response best applies to you. So please select one of these answers. And if other, please feel free to type in the free text box or the chat box below. Okay, we have about 60% of the votes in right now, so I will close the voting momentarily. Great. And as we can see here, we have a lot of sponsor companies, Transcelerate member companies looking to learn more about these tools, as well as CRO vendors and other service providers, which is terrific, because I think these tools are definitely applicable to your area of expertise. And then other sponsor companies, not Transcelerate member companies, again, which is terrific, as these tools are available on the Transcelerate website for free. Hopefully we can answer any of the questions that you may have today. Next slide, please. Okay, so just a brief introduction, an overview of Transcelerate. We are a nonprofit organization, really looking to foster collaboration and to improve the health of people around the world by accelerating and simplifying the R&D process of creating and innovating new therapies. Next slide. We were founded in 2012 with only 10 member companies and 5 initiatives. And today we are over 21 member companies strong with greater than 25 initiatives, which includes our pharmacovigilance initiatives as well. Next slide. And so Transcelerate is focused and broken down into these 3 different strategic areas. The first to the far left is harmonizing process and sharing information, and you can see some of the titles of these initiatives underneath this section. We have our enhancing the sponsor efficiencies and drug safety at the bottom. This is where our PV group falls. And then what we're going to be talking about today is improving, is our group of work called the Improving the Patient and Site Experience. And as you can see, the listed initiatives here, but with a focus specifically today on our patient technology group. Next slide. Okay, so we have another audience poll here. Are you part of a group or team that is currently including technology into clinical trials? Yes, no, or unsure? Okay, we have about 60% of the votes in, so I'm going to close the polling momentarily. And yes, so 67% of our participants are part of a group that is currently including technology in a trial. So that's great. That's great to hear. And only 23% no, but that's quite all right. So thank you for sharing your feedback. We'll just move forward to the next slide. And I think this is where I'm going to hand it over to Melissa, who can provide an overview of patient technology. Melissa?
Thank you, Anthony, and welcome everyone. So based upon the poll response, it seems that we have a lot of people, 67%, using technology in clinical trials. So I'm really excited to introduce to you a brief overview of our patient technology initiative. So next slide. So our team was formed as an initiative to find ways to enable and accelerate clinical trial use of patient-facing technology, thus leading to a richer, more objective data collection and enhanced patient experience. But first, we had to define what patient technology is for us for this work stream. And for us, this includes any digital technology with which patients interact to participate in clinical trial activities. So as you can see here, it's including everything, and it's not limited to, but we collect clinical data, collect non-clinical data, and first facilitate and participation in this study. Next slide. So the development of the toolkit began in 2017 when we really wanted to address common barriers faced by our organizations during the implementation and use of patient technology in clinical trials. Our toolkit solutions really hope to help organizations think through and address organizational challenges, operational challenges, site experience, patient experience, and the burden, the technology maturity, and understanding regulatory implications. Our commonly asked questions around our toolkit is, who is the toolkit for? And as you can see, the toolkit is designed for a large variety of our stakeholders. When should the toolkit be used? And there's different time points, and we'll talk about that today, as where the tools could be used individually or together. So that answers your third question right there. So next slide. So from 2017 until now, we've created this toolkit, and it started with the industry perspective paper, or what we call the point of view paper. And from there, we've branched out into the implementation framework, the discussion guide, regulatory landscape, the site feedback questionnaire, the vendor and sponsor engagement considerations. We created an infographic around our vendor perspectives and patient considerations. Today, we're really going to focus on introducing to you the patient considerations, the site feedback questionnaire, and the vendor and sponsor engagement considerations. But before we do that, I want to take a pause, and I have some questions for you. So next slide. So our first question for you is, what best describes how you are using any component of our technology toolkit within your company right now? So I'll give it another second.
And we have about 40% of the voting in right now.
Okay, so I'll give everyone a little bit more time. I know this is a longer poll question.
Okay, I think we're about 60, which is our threshold here. So I'll get ready to close the polling.
So it looks as though a majority of you are looking to learn about our toolkit today, or maybe have learned about it, but you haven't implemented any of them yet. So that's good. So we'll take a little deeper dive. So our next question is, where you're at, what best describes how you're using any component? Nope, that's not the right question. There you go. So for our next question is really understanding, what is your greatest barrier to technology adoption? So is it funding for a new technology, a perceived value, resistance to working differently, data management or privacy concerned, or anything other? And you don't hesitate to use the chat for other.
We're at about 50% right now, so we'll give it some more time. All right, we are just about 60%, so we'll close the polling, share the results.
So it looks like it's a little bit of a mix around the barriers to adoption, but really the main thing is the resistance to working differently and finding funding for a new technology. So move on to the next slide. And we'll talk about our toolkit and talk about the value journey around using some of these assets within our toolkit. And here we are showing a journey around an individual who is looking to utilize patient technology in his oncology trial. And if you notice the various time points where one of our toolkit assets could be utilized, you could see where he might first utilize the implementation framework to really understand the end-to-end process that might work for implementing his technology for his clinical trial. And then he might use the discussion guide to really understand how to engage with different stakeholders and the patient considerations to securing that a patient perspective is being taken into account as they're building their clinical trial. Consulting the regulatory landscape to understand any type of regulatory impact on this project and what needs to be utilized to prevent any risks. Also, Jim might use the Site Feedback Questionnaire to really learn about how these sites are implementing this new technology and what could be used for the future. And he might also debrief his implementation experience with his internal team and his vendors around sharing learnings. And you can also visit our website to really see the interactive journey, because right now we're showing it as a linear experience, but really it's circular. So meaning that at any point within this journey, you can utilize any of these toolkits. And we really hope by using these, you might experience improved efficiency, improved patient experience, more informed clinical technology selection, decreased risk for patient technology adoption, and improving our regulatory understanding. So next slide. So in summary of our toolkit, we really think that the toolkit benefits really help decision makers and study teams approach patient technology implementation strategically, making sure we have long-term goals, scalability in mind, and to stop that consistent loop of piloting and really going into full adoption and full scalability. Being able to facilitate the flow of patient technology knowledge and feedback between our internal and external stakeholders, including our vendors and sites, and really hoping that this helped the study teams identify, prevent, and mitigate risks associated with adoption, because as we're seeing, so many people are experiencing the same, and by utilizing these tools, it helps get in front of that. And really more specifically, our toolkit can help teams address the common questions. What do patients feel is important during selection of a patient technology? How can I maximize my working relationship with a patient technology vendor? And what do sites believe the impact of the patient technology is? So I have a quick question for you. Do you currently have any ongoing meetings with your patient technology vendors?
We're at about 50% voting, so we'll just give it a few more moments.
Okay. It seems that around 27% of you are currently having ongoing meetings with your vendors. 31% are no. And some of you, around 32%, are it's just not applicable to my role. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to one of our team members, Pete Schaefer.
Thanks, Melissa, for the overview of those tools. Very, very helpful. I'm going to now take you through a bit of our vendor and sponsor engagement considerations. So if we go to the next slide. So our vendor engagement tools came about from some work you saw Melissa give an overview of earlier around engaging our sponsors and how we conduct trials and apply patient technology to those trials. What we realized is there's a strong partnership with vendors to do that. And we realized during our initial primary research, we didn't have much engagement or really any engagement from those key partners. So we set out to rectify that by conducting a publicly available survey where we had 18 respondents come back. From the respondents, then we went through a selection process and conducted 4 in-depth interviews. So then that allowed us to begin to understand what possible solutions and opportunities there are in the space of partnering with vendors to deploy patient technology onto trials. So we go to the next slide. So one of those tools that we developed based on that research was our vendor sponsor engagement considerations. So what we realized, and from the poll reinforcing this a bit, there's many organizations that have set out to have interactions and have standard meetings with vendors, which is good. It's a great start. We realized though also there's a portion of sponsors and folks that don't have those ongoing meetings, and sometimes those meetings only occur when there's basically a emergency or something's off track. So what we're advocating from our research, but from working with sponsor companies and vendors, is to approach this as more of a creating a two-way ongoing dialogue between sponsor companies and vendors to really help improve the feedback and discussion around deploying PT. Patient technology is very complicated, lots of moving parts, and if you can increase the sharing and feedback cycle between the vendor and sponsor, we believe that will potentially influence your success in a positive way. So we've created this tool that allows both vendors or sponsors to look at this and how they might go about setting up a meeting. Things to consider, such as agenda topics, frequency. We encourage beginning, during, and end, not just waiting for something to go wrong. So make that a dynamic relationship. And we've set out this document to hopefully give you some pointers and tips to help you basically get started so it doesn't feel as overwhelming and to create that environment of open dialogue. So we get the next slide. So also during our conversations, we found out this kind of critical need for a two-way dialogue to improve the implementation of patient technology, but we also found some very interesting insights in talking with our vendors. So it was a great opportunity from a Transcelerate organization to have an open dialogue with those who opted in to talk with us, and we were able to delve into some details about challenges around implementing patient technology with sponsors. And what we did is we created this vendor infographic that's now available on our site for everyone to take a look at. I'm not going to convey everything in that because I want to leave some reason for you to go to the site and take a look at this information, but I will give you a few key pieces of information to maybe whet your appetite. As you can imagine, one of the key things that vendors looked at us, sponsor companies, from conversations we had with them was our nature of being fairly risk averse and looking at adopting patient technology. And I think from the earlier poll, we saw that one of the key factors being resistance to current ways of working. So hopefully that resonates with each of you. And I think our vendors see that in interactions they have with us. So something definitely to consider as you're looking to implement patient technology and think about that impact, not only to your sponsor organization, but that relationship you're setting out with a vendor, especially maybe potentially if it's a new vendor. So that's just one of the insights. There's many more where that came from. So there's some very interesting insights that you might not probably hear from your normal interactions with vendors that I think the Transcelerate organization, our team, was able to distill down and bring forward and put in a nice digestible form there that I encourage you to take a look at after today's session. So if we get to the next slide. I'm going to take a minute now to cover some of the benefits we have around this. So as I've alluded to, hopefully really improved partnership between sponsor companies and vendors. So we're hoping this really enables then the possibility of having a positive patient technology deployment in your organization. We believe will improve the experience of using technology in trials. So if we can drive that better engagement, it should lead to better outcomes. We believe an acceleration and adoption of patient-facing technology, obviously that partnership, the stronger it is, it should lead to increased speed of adoption. And of course, probably one of the most important things is really driving up the meeting effectiveness and outcomes of those meetings. So one thing we heard from both vendors and sponsors during our conversations is many times those meetings don't always have agendas. They don't always have clear outcomes. The vendor and sponsor engagement considerations document that we've developed helps you formulate that prior to the meeting. So it really walks you through how to structure your meeting, who should attend, what the agenda, what should look like, things to consider for that agenda, and will really help you walk through and give you a guide to building that. There's no one size fits all, so it gives you things to consider and kind of a flow to walk through. So we're hoping that'll help for those people, especially who currently don't have meetings. Really hope that tool will help you get those meetings started and encourage you to start those meetings. Really now, kind of some of the questions these tools can help kind of address. So what are the barriers to what are some of the barriers vendors are facing implementing PT? That's in our infographic. So really encourage you, you'll see some insights there of things that vendors think are challenging in working with sponsor companies, some of the challenges they're having. Some will probably, you totally will appreciate and say, yeah, I figured that. Some hopefully will be very insightful things you haven't considered before. So I'm not gonna give those all away, so you have a chance to go take a look at those. Also, how to establish successful partnership between sponsors and vendors. So we think these tools will really help you answer those questions. What does success look like? How do I know if if I'm creating the environment and dialogue and feedback cycle between my sponsor company and the vendor? I think some of the tools we've developed should help you think about it in a different way and also establish what success looks like between that partnership or for that partnership. And finally, as I've kind of alluded to, how do I prepare and manage a meeting? So none of us want to walk into meetings that don't have a purpose, don't have a clear agenda, and don't have an outcome. So the tools we've developed, I hope, will help you structure those meetings, think about those meetings a little bit different way. And if you're having meetings today, we hope those tools will help you think about some new things, maybe not currently in your meeting, to make it even more effective. If you aren't having any meetings at all, hopefully I'll help you get started with having those first few meetings and break the barrier a little bit of getting started, which we know can be a challenge of just establishing a meeting cadence, the agenda, and outcomes you need. So whether you currently have meetings or not, we believe these tools will help you, will benefit you if you take a look at them. So we'll encourage you to do that outside this meeting. So with that, I'm going to move to the next slide, which is a poll question. So here we're looking for experience you have with your patient experience considerations and adopting technology in trials. So I'll have Anthony start that poll for us.
So we have about 40% of the voting in, so we'll just give it a few more moments.
Great. So I encourage you to quickly get your answer in there.
Okay, so we'll close up the voting now.
Perfect. Great. And so what we're seeing here is do you think that patient experience is considered when adopting? So looks like a large portion of sometimes, so around 60% would say sometimes. So I think that's very interesting. I'm glad to see pretty low numbers around no, only 10%. So that's good to hear. And then 25% with yes. So with that, I'm going to hand to Melissa, who will hopefully provide you some tools to help with that.
Thank you, Pete, and thank you around your oversight for our vendor considerations tool. So I'm going to take a deeper dive around our patient considerations and our tool to be utilized when using technology in clinical trials. And I think given the circumstances where we're trying to do a lot of quick changes and try to go into virtual clinical trials, telemed, given the pandemic, this is quite an interesting time to talk about this. So our next slide. So first, I really wanted to talk about our methodology around patient engagement. And what we did is we worked in collaboration with our patient experience team, and we actively worked with patients because we wanted to understand how sponsors can better design clinical trials, ensuring that we're using the patient's voice. And so what we did is we engaged with around 150 patients, whether it be in person, telephone interviews, and surveys. We tried to have as much global representation as possible with a diverse age range, as you can see, between 19 and 78 years. And within those 150 patients engaged, we had a variety of conditions. So next slide. So through that engagement and through those insights that were shared, we were able to create a tool known as the patient considerations. And basically what this document is a list of core questions and considerations, again, developed with patients to help teams think critically about how their decisions to add a piece of technology and these decisions to use it will impact patients. So what's covered within the document is talking about patients' benefits. So what's going to benefit a patient in participating in not only a clinical trial, but by adding that technology to the clinical trial? What's their burden? How is their experience different or changed now by utilizing this technology? The patient safety, privacy, the maintenance of the technology, the length of the study, the compliance, consent and comprehension, patients' willingness to participate, not only just now deciding to participate in a clinical trial, but now you're adding a technology component to it. What's the technology support? And at the end of the day, what's their user experience in the design? So this tool, if you're picking it up early within your ideation and planning for your study and your program design, should really help you ensuring that you are taking all patients' considerations in when designing your study. So I really want to further share some information. So the next slide. The patients that we engaged really helped us to develop a tool that encompassed insights and really helped us fill some gaps that maybe we didn't realize were there. So we performed a survey And some gaps that we identified was that our draft was missing informing patients on their data privacy and rights. So we forgot to take that into consideration. Ensuring that the patient technology is end user friendly, making sure that it was easy to use, so that way you were securing compliance and good data collection. The need for more methods of training, understanding that everyone learns differently and there's more than one way to learn. Maybe consider including visual, audio, or sensory training. Providing our patients with the benefit and purpose for the patient technology use. So making sure we don't just add this technology into a clinical trial, we're sharing what's the benefit and what's the reason why we added this into maybe what is standardly known as just your regular clinical trial. Providing supporting tools. So maybe, if we're using an iPad, providing a stylus or a voice command for data entry, depending on your understanding your patient population and what their needs are when you're having this digital technology implemented. And then reminders for patient reminders are always welcomed. So these are some gaps that we were able to add into our considerations tool. And some interesting insights from some of our panelists from the surveys and from our interviews was that training sessions are crucial. Maybe having more than one of them, on-demand WebEx, maybe a manual that can answer questions the patient's lost, not rushing through, and allowing that time for questions. So that was key for one of our patients that we interviewed. Another patient that had participated in 2 clinical trials said that we need to make it, in this case, it was a heart monitor, where the straps are more comfortable. I know it has to be placed in certain areas, and also it was so big. I'm little. I only weigh about 100 pounds. The device was all heavy and uncomfortable. Maybe they can make it more comfortable and smaller, or finding a better location. So again, it's going back to your end user experience, understanding your end user experience. And those are some of the insights we got by having that patient engagement as we built this patient considerations tool that we're really hoping that you guys will take a look at and utilize. So next slide. And so by utilizing the patient considerations tool, we really feel that some of the benefits are really just enabling clinical protocols to become more patient-centered and providing a positive end user experience, potentially decreasing the patient burden in the participating in a clinical trial. So now, it's not only the burden of participating in a clinical trial, but that added burden sometimes technology is sometimes perceived as. Positively impacting patient recruitment, adherence, compliance, completing studies more efficiently, and the potential for the full patient technology adoption in clinical trials, which is ultimately our goal for the toolkit overall. And more specifically, we really hope that the patient considerations tool can help address common questions as what needs to be considered from a patient perspective to adopt technology. How can a sponsor or a vendor enhance the end user experience? And what is needed to help ensure compliance and patient technology understanding? So I want to thank you. I hope that you take a look at our assets webpage and on the Transcelerate, not only to look at the journey, but also all of our tools. And so right now I'm going to pass it on to Pete because he's going to do a deep dive around the Site Feedback Questionnaire.
Thanks, Melissa. Thanks for that review of the patient considerations. Hopefully you've seen from the talk so far that we're very keen to understand each aspect of the partners and stakeholders involved in implementing patient technology onto trials, and sites play a key role in that as well. So we thought it was very important to be able to gather feedback and create the environment where we can have a dialogue with sites to understand what that deployment of patient technology looks like for them and also for patients. So we go to the next slide. What we did is we set out to develop a tool to basically help begin to define what that that could look like, that feedback cycle and that interaction cycle could look like. So we set out to talk with 20 representatives from different sites across multiple geographies and different types. And they had some common feedback and some common insights that led us to the development of the Site Feedback Questionnaire, or what we call the PTSFQ. So it can be, you can say it can be difficult getting the right help in the right amount of time. There's often a delay. Many systems are designed from the perspective of protocol writers and technologies and may not have the end user in mind. And probably another very key one, sites don't always get to say whether to use technology. So in our interactions with sites, I think they sometimes felt also that their voice wasn't always heard. So we tried to create a way to create an environment between sponsors and sites to drive that engagement and feedback cycle. So if we go to the next slide. And this is what the tool will look like when you go to our website and take a look at it. So it is basically a list of questions broken into 3 parts designed to capture sites' impressions of patient-facing technology and studies. So that's what it's set out to do. And we encourage you to look at this survey beginning, middle, end again. So not just to wait to the end for engagement to understand, because it won't allow for a robust feedback cycle for you to make changes and develop learnings. So we're encouraging you to think about implementing this questionnaire from the beginning and then a midpoint and to help really improve that site experience, your experience as a sponsor, and ultimately the patient experience as well. So it's intended to be either used from a sponsor side or a site can initiate this as well. And it basically allows to create a common platform and common voice for conveying information that may be faced by sites back to the sponsor. So hopefully a useful tool to help you build that engagement, gather that feedback to improve the execution of your clinical trial. If we go to the next. So some of the benefits, we really believe it's going to better foster open dialogue between sponsors and sites to really unearth the challenges facing patient technology and clinical studies. So I think obviously the earlier you know those challenges, the earlier you know maybe what's not working as you thought or in an ideal state, the sooner you can address and take action to figure out how to resolve that. It was really helped to construct also to mitigate potential issues as studies progressing, which is why we're advocating that you start in the beginning, middle, and end, that way to help you really get an early view of potential emerging issues before they become larger and harder to mitigate. So if you can find that information out early, you can take action. And we're hoping that the learnings you gather from the sites and the site survey and the feedback will help you with future study design. So some of the questions that may help you address. So was the training and training materials, was that sufficient? Did it really help the site personnel and patients get the outcome I wanted? Did it help make that happen? Does the technology put an unmanageable burden on the site or personnel? So again, you know, I envisioned by sending out these iPads or this app that it would reduce the burden and how the site conducted my trial, but to find out maybe it actually increased. So things you want to know so you can make adjustments not only for that trial, but for future trials. And also, along with our patient considerations, the survey, the site survey may help you find some of the overall patient experience when using technology. So many times patients will convey information to the sites about their experience, what was happening. The sites may have insights from dealing with patients directly that can be gathered from that survey, and then you can take action and have a open dialogue with your site on what next steps could look like. Okay. With that, if we go to the next slide, I'm going to transition a bit to talk about overall patient technology and everything you've heard today. So our team, hopefully it's come across between Melissa and myself and Amber and Anthony that we're passionate about patient technology on clinical trials. We believe that it can be transformational for improving patient experience improving site experience and sponsor outcomes. And we developed, with many others and many other sponsors, we developed these set of tools to help you get started and relieve some of those fears of how to get started or how to tackle overall adopting patient technology. And like many of you who are doing it already, we believe these tools can also help you if you're on that journey or near the end of that journey even, because it's hard to know everything. So you can benefit from the collective wisdom of many people who have been there and trying to implement patient technology on the trials. We've distilled that information into a toolkit to take you through that whole journey, and hopefully you can learn from that and it'll help you enable your adoption of technology across your trials. So we really believe that's going to, if we can successfully deploy patient technology trials, we believe it's going to enable richer and more meaningful data in the end. It's going to improve outcomes of clinical measures and positively impact broader patient community. So we believe these tools will help do that. It will benefit all those involved. And if we go to the next slide, again, just going to end on some of our tools really quick. So this is the visual that Melissa described earlier on our site. It's a bit more robust in its dynamic nature, so really encourage you to follow the link once you get these slides after the webinar to go out and visit our site, go through Jim's journey, see all the different aspects of these tools. Melissa and I didn't have enough time to go in detail of every one, explore all aspects, so I encourage you to go and see all the possibilities and all the tools and information out there that will help you on your journey, whether you're just getting started when you're starting this gym or you're at a specific step along the way that you can peek into and see all the available resources. And you'll see also on our asset page across the bottom much more details about all these tools and some of the ones we didn't get to cover today in detail that are out there but are likely very beneficial to help you along your journey of implementing patient technology. So with that, I'd like to thank everyone for their attention. Thank Melissa for her overview, and I'm going to hand to Amber for our Q&A session.
Yep. I think we have one more audience poll before the Q&A.
Oh, sorry about that.
Would you consider, based off of what you've heard from our speakers, Pete and Melissa today, would you consider using any additional portions of the toolkit after this session? So think about if you're already using some of them, are there additional ones that you would add on? The options are yes, no, unsure. Okay, thank you for that response. I'm happy to see that about 66% of you would continue or look into using additional portions. The other 34% are unsure, so hopefully after this webinar, you'll go back and get some more information to help you guide that decision, and happy to see that nobody responded no. At this time, I'd like to thank Pete and Melissa for giving the overview of some of the assets within the Patient Technology Toolkit. We'll open it up to a Q&A session. We have about 15 minutes remaining. As a reminder, if you have any questions, please insert them into the questions box in your control panel.